Hello and welcome. I'm Stephanie Seskin, the Deputy Director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, a program of Smart Growth America. We're here to talk about Complete Streets projects and how we can tell if they're successful. Our introductory guide on this topic will be released on Thursday, April 2nd. Everyone joining us today has received an advance copy, and a recording of this webinar will be available on Thursday. This guide and this webinar were supported by AARP. AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with a membership of more than 37 million that helps people 50 plus have independence, choice, and control in ways that are beneficial to them and society as a whole. AARP does not endorse candidates for public office or make contributions to either political campaigns or candidates. They produce AARP, the magazine, the definitive voice for Americans 50 plus, and the world's largest circulation magazine. AARP Bulletin, which is the go-to news source for the 50-plus audience. AARP Viva, a bilingual lifestyle multimedia platform addressing the interests and needs of Hispanic Americans. And national television and radio programming, including My Generation and Inside E Street. AARP has staffed offices in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. On today's webinar, we'll discuss performance measures in a Complete Streets paradigm, why project-level evaluation is an important tool in implementing Complete Streets, and provide a few examples on how you can measure the success of your projects. We've got a great group joining us today. Corlette Hannon from AARP, Hannah Kite, a fellow here at Smart Growth America, Marshall Elizer at Gresham Smith & Partners, Megan Mittman at Fair & Peers, and Adam Best at Killison & Associates. And we encourage everyone listening to participate in the conversation. You can type your questions in the webinar screen or join in on Twitter with #CompleteStreets or by sending questions to @SmartGrowthUSA. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Corlette Hannon, she's a senior legislative representative with AARP's State Advocacy and Strategy Integration Group. In this role, Corlette supports AARP's state and local level advocacy efforts. She provides issue-specific technical assistance to AARP's state offices on consumer-oriented legislative and regulatory advocacy in the areas of telecommunications, housing, transportation, and mortgage-related issues. Ms. Hannon joined AARP in 1999. Before coming to AARP, she served as technical assistant to Commissioner Agnes Alexander at the Public School Commission of the District of Columbia, focusing on the regulation of telecommunications, energy, and transportation providers. Ms. Hannon was also an attorney with the Washington, D.C. law firm Webster & Fredrickson. She is a graduate of the University of Maryland College Park with a BA in economics, and she earned her JD from Howard University School of Law. Corlette?
Thank you, Stephanie. I would like to take just a brief moment to express AARP's support for creation of the Evaluating Complete Streets Projects Toolkit. AARP is active on transportation issues, especially complete streets issues, at the community, state, and national levels. We appreciate the hard work that the National Complete Streets Coalition has put into making this resource available and look forward to making this toolkit an integral part of AARP's transportation advocacy efforts as we work with transportation agencies, coalition partners, and others to evaluate the effects of transportation projects. Thanks again, Stephanie.
And thank you, Corlette, and again to AARP for its ongoing support of Complete Streets and this project. I hope you all saw our latest research report, Safer Streets, Stronger Economies, which was released last Tuesday. In that report, we found that Complete Streets projects have the potential to deliver huge benefits to communities in terms of getting people where they need to go safely. But it's tough to make that case when the before and after data aren't collected, even on relatively common measures like crashes and numbers of people moving by different modes. And as for other measures, well, they're even more rare. You know it when you see it, doesn't quite cut it when telling residents and elected officials what investing in a Complete Streets project will get them. And terms like LOS or ADT don't exactly paint the most complete or interesting picture either. But collecting and sharing data from projects that are clearly related to goals set with residents and leaders, that's very helpful. Conventional transportation measures focused on automobile movement have resulted in projects that expand roadway capacity and speed. Because those were our measures of success, the comfort or utility of other modes of travel and the needs of people and places most often weren't considered. In short, our resulting projects were not complete streets. What gets measured gets done. Success in the complete streets paradigm means adopting different measures of success, measures that match the goals for the community, the neighborhood, and the project. Too often it seems that we set great goals at the macro level, but then don't think about what the project level output and outcomes should be. We need to measure what we want to get done. So the first step is defining those goals with the community, then working together to figure out how you know you achieved that goal. It's not a fast or simple process, but it's worthwhile. And as you move through project development, design, and construction, keep those goals in mind. Take baseline measures. Figure out what's a reasonable time frame for collecting that data again. Is it after a year, 3 years, on a continuous basis? Answering those questions isn't easy either, since there isn't one best time frame for every measure. And it's okay to not get it perfectly the first or fifth time. It's a process. Once collected, data help inform future decisions on other projects, as well as tweaks you might want to make to the street you just finished. Importantly, the data should be used to tell the story of the investment. What were things like before? What were the goals, the trade-offs made, the results? And be sure to use photos to help tell the story of how things got better and how you made progress towards those community goals. To reiterate a point in our document, your measures of success do not have to be complicated. Yes, some goals do require sophisticated metrics, but others can be much easier. Each new tree planted, for example, is a move toward a goal of a greener community. Each block of new sidewalk fills a gap in the network. These are valid measures of success. While people respond to outcomes like fewer injurious crashes or higher numbers of kids walking to school, well-communicated outputs can also resonate. Identify those outputs, say shorter crossing distance because you've built curb extensions or added a median. In your communications, connect that output to a narrative that explains the ways they make the crossing easier and safer for people on foot or for those waiting for the bus or those driving by. Our guide includes both potential output and potential outcome metrics for a variety of measures related to 5 common complete streets goals: access, economy, environment, place, and safety. We've illustrated how some communities are applying a broader set of performance measures for these goal areas through a series of short case studies. At the end of the document, you'll find links to the examples shared in those case studies, as well as tools and resources to take you to the next level. While the focus is on project-level evaluation, some related network-level measures are included. Network measurement can provide a clear picture of the changes across a community over time, or reveal larger patterns and trends than a single project can. We present these measures and metrics as options, not mandates, and with the full understanding that the list doesn't include every measure a community may want to use. Choose that subset of measures most relevant locally. And you'll also need to decide on and apply an objective, that is, a desired direction and magnitude related to your goals for each measure. We've identified the ways these measures and metrics could be used to show progress in public health and in social equity. And to talk a bit more about this, I'll hand things off to Hannah Kite, our Complete Streets Fellow. Hannah?
Thanks, Stephanie. Almost every facet of Complete Streets improvements impact human health. Some impacts, such as decreases in pedestrian and vehicle crashes, have an immediate impact on fatalities or injuries. Complete Streets projects that lead to improved air quality can influence cardiovascular and respiratory health. Scientists have documented fewer heart attacks and fewer asthma-related emergency room visits on days with significantly less air pollution. Many health impacts, however, result from a chain of events and are influenced by a multitude of factors. Increased access to jobs, another potential impact of Complete Streets policies, can reduce unemployment, which in turn leads to reduced risk for both heart disease and poor mental health. Increases in people walking, bicycling, or taking transit helps prevent diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic diseases. But those impacts can take decades to manifest, making their impact harder to measure. We also don't have a lot of micro-level data. Netflix knows the top movie rentals by zip code, but more often than not, diabetes, asthma, mental health, or obesity rates are unavailable at a neighborhood level, making it difficult to compare rates from different neighborhoods, not to mention a project at an intersection or along a street segment. The lack of micro-level data makes it difficult to communicate health impacts at geographies that are relevant to residents and elected officials. Privacy concerns, understandably, also restrict the use of health data below the zip code level. There's no need to despair, however. In our report, we've identified project and network level measures that have a close link to health, such as trips by foot, bicycle, or public transit, counts of fatalities and serious injuries, and even measures as simple as the number of trees planted. A handful of metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, across the country, including the Nashville Area MPO, have explicitly identified or explicitly included health-related measures when measuring transportation outcomes. A handful of cities have also found ways to measure equity. For example, Seattle's pedestrian master plan has 4 equity performance measures, including the city's investment in high-priority areas, increases in public engagement on pedestrian issues, increases in transit ridership, and increases in the mode share of people walking. Furthermore, transportation agencies can partner with local police departments, health departments, Safe Routes to School programs, and other entities to collect health-related data. Many health departments have conducted community health assessments as part of a public health accreditation process and might be interested in partnering for these efforts. The resources section of our report includes a list of potential data partners and descriptions of the kinds of data they track. An increasing number of jurisdictions are also interested in measuring equity. Disproportionate transportation and planning investments in more affluent communities has exacerbated inequality for low-income communities and communities of color. There's a growing awareness of how local and federal land use policies, such as redlining, have perpetuated inequities that decimated communities and have had a long-term impact on the wealth of African American families. Transportation agencies can assess inequities by stratifying data. Nationwide, the rate of bicycling deaths for Latinos is 56% higher than it is for non-Hispanic whites. For Blacks, the rate is 28% higher. Looking for similar differences in rates of serious injuries and fatalities by race and ethnicity or by neighborhood can reveal inequities and help identify areas of improvement. In this guide, we highlight a number of transportation measures that can be relevant to equity goals. We specifically focus on the distribution of impacts and benefits to ensure projects provide affordable and accessible connections for traditionally disadvantaged communities, including people of color, older adults, low-income households, and people with disabilities. Equity can and should be measured at the project level. Many equity concerns can also be addressed through thoughtful community engagement. In our report, we include a case study of community outreach in Washington, D.C., led by Nelson Nygaard on behalf of the district's planning agency. Outreach for the Mid-City East Plan, an area plan to preserve the character of the community, included 6 walking tours and mobile workshops. Workshops were held at local schools, bus stops, a park, cafes, a popular off-street trail, and on a street corner near a public housing complex. An interactive online forum received 2,000 unique visits, 100 ideas, and 20 photos. We've all seen the same people show up to planning meetings. Innovative community engagement models meet people where they are, take into account who will be the most affected by a project, and recognize that it may be easier for some individuals to participate. Some agencies offer childcare, food, language interpretation, or small stipends to cover transportation or other costs of meeting attendance. Tracking participation and public input and checking that it matches the demographics of the community can be one way to evaluate equity at the project level. Health and equity is interconnected with every aspect of transportation and planning, but it's possible to select measures that are meaningful indicators for your community. We hope that this report will help guide jurisdictions in taking the first step towards measuring these important factors.
Thanks, Hannah. The guide we're releasing this week is meant for agencies interested but just beginning their project evaluation efforts. It's meant to help them better inform their own decisions, keeping in mind what the community wants, and telling the story of their transportation investments in a way that has broad appeal. While it's our first resource specifically on performance measurement and specifically for project evaluation, it comes from years of talking with communities about potential performance measures, from related national and local research, and from tools and documents that agencies today actually are employees. And it's not the only conversation happening out there. So now I'd like to turn over to our panel of experts for their thoughts. And for everyone on the webinar, I will point out that the slides are not going to change very frequently. So You're going to get to know their faces very well. So with us, we have Marshall Eliza. He's a principal and senior transportation engineer with Gresham Smith and Partners in Nashville, Tennessee. A registered professional engineer in 13 states and certified professional traffic operations engineer. His career spans 22 years of municipal public works experience and 17 years of private experience in transportation planning and design. Through these activities, Marshall has gained diverse experience in transportation planning, engineering, design, and operations throughout the U.S. and internationally. He has shared his knowledge and experience as an instructor for urban and complete streets design workshops and webinars for professional organizations, universities, and state and local agencies. Since 2008, Marshall has served on AASHTO's Technical Committee on Geometric Design. That's the group responsible for the Green Book. He was lead technical editor of ITE's Urban Street Geometric Design Handbook, a policy advisor to the ITE CNU Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares, a context-sensitive approach, and technical advisor on AARP's Complete Streets for Older Adults. He is principal investigator on NCHRP 1548, Guidelines for Designing Low and Intermediate Speed Roadways that Serve All Users. A past international president of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Marshall has also served in transportation leadership roles with APWA and the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices and the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. We also have Megan Rittman. She's a senior associate with Fair & Peers in their San Francisco office. She has over 12 years of multimodal transportation engineering and planning experience. She co-authored the multi-award-winning California Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Assessment Technical Guidebooks and was associate in charge of the San Francisco Walk First Vision Zero project, which won the 2015 TRB Pedestrian Committee Best Paper Award. Megan is the lead author of ITE's recommended practice, Accommodating Pedestrians and Bicyclists in Interchanges. She is the chair of the new ITE Complete Streets Council and is a member of the TRB Pedestrian Committee. And finally, we have Adam Vest. He's a senior engineer with Kittleson Associates. For over 12 years, Adam has led a variety of transportation engineering, planning, and design projects throughout the United States and Australia. These include multimodal corridor and network studies, downtown master plans, bicycle and pedestrian performance measurement, transit accessibility planning, neighborhood livability assessments, non-motorized safety evaluations, and community outreach. Adam has spent the last 6 years in the Mid-Atlantic region working with numerous agencies, including the District Department of Transportation, Baltimore City Department of Transportation, Philadelphia City Planning Commission, Maryland State Highway Administration, and the Federal Highway Administration. Adam spends his free time biking, hiking, traveling, and gardening. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Before we dig into specifics, I've made my case for using managers, but I'm working in a nonprofit research space. So as practicing planners and engineers, why do you think performance measures matter? I'll send it to Marshall first.
Thank you, Stephanie. I believe performance measures matter because there's oftentimes a lot of confusion and maybe even disagreement on the front end of a complete streets project about what you're really trying to accomplish and how different it is from sort of the traditional way of looking at roadway improvement projects. And the measurements and the value systems are so different in a complete streets project that really you end up educating the other regular roadway designers and elected and appointed officials and the public at large and businesses about what you're trying to achieve with that project. And if you don't start out by discussing what performance you're trying to achieve with a particular design, then you really don't have the roadmap for where you're trying to get to through the design process. And I think it's just critical for education, communication, and without that, you're building something, and then everyone draws their own conclusions about was it successful or not. And I think there needs to be a much more structured and comprehensive way of looking at those measures.
Thanks, Marshall. Megan?
Sure, thanks for the chance to weigh in on some opinions here. So I think it can be helpful in a couple of different ways. One can be just in terms of making better projects. So when we collaborate and think about performance measures early on in a project planning phase, I think it can really help us with sensitivity testing and really kind of optimizing the project design to have a better sense from early on in the project visioning of kind of what a desired outcome will be for the project. And then I think it's also just really important for coalition building and collaboration in support of a project. Lots of times these projects require tough trade-offs, and having a better sense qualitatively and quantitatively early on in a project of what the desired outcomes are can help later on when some of those really tough decisions have to be made in order for a project to move forward.
Great point. Adam, your thoughts?
Sure, thanks. Performance measures are really versatile tools. I think we use them for so many different types of things. A few that really come to mind for me include just prioritization of investment. As more agencies really work towards planning, funding, and actually implementing Complete Streets projects, and knowing that there are all these funding constraints out there, it's really important to have measures in place that help decision makers prioritize these projects. In addition to that, they're valuable in helping to compare really a series of alternatives on, for instance, on a single corridor. And as Stephanie alluded to earlier, they're really valuable for before or after evaluations to really understand how maybe an implemented project, how well it's actually working, and maybe what are some elements that aren't working as well as an agency thought they would, so that they can potentially make changes for design projects in the future.
Thanks. Now, Marshall, I know you've been working on these issues for a while, and you've seen lots of projects from plan concepts through completion. Can you tell me some of the benefits that you've seen come from Complete Streets projects?
Sure. Thanks. Actually, the range of projects I've worked on, I've seen a host of benefits because some of our projects have involved average daily traffic in the mid-30s, and some of them have obviously been maybe more in the 10 or 15,000 vehicles a day range. But in all cases, what I've seen is an improvement in safety. Not only for pedestrians and bicycles through better facilities and consideration, in their crossings and accommodation, but also vehicles, because the slowing of vehicles, which oftentimes accompanies a Complete Streets project, provides improved safety for vehicles and their users as well. And so obviously safety tends to come to the top of an awful lot of discussions when you work with the businesses and property owners. And really, it's difficult to measure, as we all are discussing here today, but the comfort and convenience and the accessibility of these other modes to have the understanding that they belong, and they have the resources to actually move along a corridor in the right of way and across the corridor in a reasonable and safe fashion. Those have been benefits that every one of our projects have included. Aesthetics have typically been a significant benefit of the project. With some of that space, we've been able to add back on-street parking for revitalization of some of the economic properties, and just generally a better environment, a blending of the street space and the surrounding land use and enhancement of the overall context. So it's really, these projects, they're all a little different, but they end up having many of the same types of benefits that I just mentioned. But those are the ones that come to mind for me.
Thanks, Marshall. And to continue with you, can you tell me a little bit about what the traditional barriers in measuring Complete Streets outcomes have been?
Well, as I said initially, I think we've had trouble getting some of the traditional design process folks to kind of buy into these other performance criteria and measures, and not only that they are as important as the traditional vehicular performance measures, but how do you measure them, since many of them, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are more qualitative rather than quantitative. and being able to measure in sort of gradations or scales the improvements in or the impacts on these other measures. So I think it's really number one, getting them to agree that these other measures are important, and number two, getting them to agree on how to measure them have really been the barriers that I've dealt with.
Thanks, Marshall. And I know despite these challenges, the field has been growing and more measures have been incorporated. Adam, what measures or metrics have caught your attention lately?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. I mean, we've been measuring quality of service for autos for decades, so there's an infinite amount of measures in place to do that. But as we have more and more of these complete streets projects, the measures we have and are seeing are really growing, so it's kind of an exciting time. Two that I find really interesting and I have kind of growing support. One being levels of traffic stress, which you see probably more on the West Coast than on the East Coast, but it's growing on the East Coast as well as Danish bicycle and pedestrian level service. The levels of traffic stress is it's a really interesting approach because it's really intuitive and it's easy to understand, and it often will frame the discussion in a way that I think a lot of the older non-auto measures that we've been trying to use in the past where they maybe just don't do as well. And it really focuses on how on pinch points essentially, and really utilizing an entire street network instead of trying to shoehorn in a particular bike facility on a major arterial. The Danish level service, despite it being, I think you get a lot of negative comments related to foreign methodologies, but in this case it actually uses a methodology that's very similar to some of the more historic American methodologies, for instance, like highway capacity manuals, multimodal level service. But a couple benefits with the Danish bike and ped LLS is that it actually places an increased emphasis on the actual facilities, whereas the similar American methodologies focus more on traffic volumes and speeds and those sorts of things. And one of the reasons we've turned to this methodology for the past few years really is that it also allows you to measure level service for cycle tracks and protected bike lanes and for trails, and those things, at least not yet, they're not incorporated in some of the more traditional American quality of service measures.
Great, thanks, Adam. And Megan, I know you've been involved in some new tools. Would you like to share some examples?
Definitely. I think what's interesting that we're seeing happening here, especially out in California, is certainly the tools being used in kind of a planning kind of project concept development perspective, but also increasingly in the environmental review and impact analysis side of things. So we're seeing that cities are developing new requirements in their general plans that call for multimodal level service or multimodal impact assessment, and then if they're going to have that as a requirement that projects have to be evaluated on, well then there's a need for performance measures to be in place to be able to quantify that and to be able to demonstrate kind of before and after analysis and compare alternatives against each other. So talked about just a couple of recent projects that I've been working on in the East Bay of San Francisco, in the cities of Richmond and San Pablo and El Cerrito, where we've been using what we call our Street Score Plus tool. It's a multimodal level of service tool that uses a built environment factors approach and the level of traffic stress approach that Adam was just speaking of, as a way to try to not just look at auto level of service, but level of service for transit, for pedestrians, and for bicyclists as well, and use it in a concept alternatives evaluation as well as the environmental evaluation. So the Rumrow Boulevard is a project that we're currently doing right now. It's the complete street study for that. There's a picture up on the screen. This is a 2 lanes in each direction corridor that has a lot of pedestrian safety challenges right now and is kind of the main street for this neighborhood, but it really operates right now as a thoroughfare and really kind of an overflow corridor from the really congested freeways that are nearby. So we've been looking at ways to improve pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and vehicle access, throughput, mobility options in this corridor and make it just a much more kind of main street for the community, for the residents and the schools and the businesses that are all alongside and across it. So some of the tools that we've been using, we came up with 3 different alternatives that would look at kind of different ways of prioritizing bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, and in all cases making sure that we still had improved transit access and facilities as well as acceptable levels of auto throughput. And we used the StreetScore Plus tool to take a look at specifically for bicycles, the level of traffic stress that they would be experiencing. As Adam mentioned, that did allow us to look at kind of some more of the innovative treatments. You see here that we're looking at parking separated cycle tracks as one of the options, also kind of your conventional Class 1 path facilities, as well as some some linear park options that we looked at. And so we were able to use the level of traffic stress metric for bicyclists to weigh the 3 different alternatives to see what that would experience for bicyclists. We also came up with both intersection and segment level pedestrian metrics. We worked with the communities, both the 2 cities that have jurisdiction along this corridor, to develop what those metrics would be and then to run those for the different alternatives. And we came up with similar ones for transit, both at the bus stops and the experience throughout the corridor for transit. And then went ahead and ran traditional auto level of service too, so that we could kind of line up side by side all of the different metrics for the 3 alternatives and really be able to have a much more comprehensive sense of how the different alternatives functioned against each other and make sure that the metrics that we used for looking at those 3 really reflected the community values and the general plan requirements that those communities have for looking at multimodal level service metrics. And do next slide, please. So this is just another example of looking at this in the context of a specific plan as opposed to a corridor study, and really being able to look at the multimodal impact assessments associated with some different, in this case, not just infrastructure alternatives, but also land use alternatives, and kind of being able to look at multimodal trip generation impacts and how that reflects the transportation as well. So this is something that we've been, I think the really exciting part about it is the community engagement aspects in terms of really early on deciding what those metrics are going to be and then using those metrics to improve the quality of the designs that we're coming up with and then be able to really evaluate them against each other in a transparent way, but in a much more holistic way than just conventional auto level of service would have allowed us before.
Hey, thanks for those examples, Megan. That's really helpful to hear about. So our document is really about project level evaluation, sort of before and after, and I'm wondering how you feel that this kind of measure can be integrated into overall decision making. Megan, you were just talking, so I'm going to hand it to you.
Yeah, definitely. So I think in terms of being able to kind of bring a coalition along, and in the case for the RUMRL, I think a lesson that we learned was having both like a technical advisory committee and a community advisory committee was really helpful, and working with both of those groups to develop the performance measures and to talk about how those relate to the different alternatives. We found that in particular doing really compelling infographics was important as part of that, so ways to make sure that you're telling a case or telling the story really effectively, not just with numbers and worksheets, but also with really effective graphics to make sure that a wide range of stakeholders is able to participate in it and to see what the different trade-offs could be associated with the analysis that you're performing.
Thanks. In one of our examples in our document, we note how Local Law 23 helps support New York City DOT's move toward complete streets by requiring the DOT to develop, monitor, and report on a set of indicators that are related to goals like sustainability, mobility, quality of life, and infrastructure outcomes. And some later laws also set other measurement requirements and standards. Transportation Alternatives, which is a wonderful organization in New York City, worked really hard to support that bill and get it through. Megan, would you mind also giving an example of how elected officials or residents or community groups can help set the measures that transportation professionals use?
Yeah, so we're kind of engaging in a big discussion of that out here in California with the recent passage of the Senate Bill 743, which is going to say that auto level of service is not the only measure to be used in environmental assessments, but what's going to replace it is still kind of being determined. It looks like it's likely to be a VMT-based metric. So a lot of cities are just kind of having to go back to the drawing board to figure out what their significance criteria are going to be in light of these kind of changing regulations and guidelines. So a current example that I've been watching as a resident of the city of Oakland is some really effective advocacy on the part of the Bike East Bay group, where they've been tracking this regulation. They know that things are changing, and so they've been really practically pushing the city, knowing that a lot of repaving projects are coming up, to say, you know, let's not just use auto level of service to determine if we're just going to put back the stripes the way they were, but maybe this is a chance to really do some of those road diets we've been thinking about doing, to really put in some more innovative bikeways. And so there's a Bikeways 2.0 plan that's going to be launched pretty soon that's going to look at CEQA streamlining, and in particular for road diets opportunities to not just look at auto level of service as ways to decide whether or not a corridor is a good candidate for that.
Very cool. Thanks, Megan. So now I'm kind of wondering how planners and engineers are improving their public engagement practices for transportation projects. And I think I'm going to throw this to Adam to answer.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. I think everyone has in mind when they think of community outreach, they see the big giant room or a gymnasium where you have one central location where everyone comes to really talk about the project, and you see a PowerPoint. And I think in some instances that works pretty well, but effective engagement, especially today, is really built on some level of flexibility. It can't just be one room where everyone meets. It can also be going to people, whether it's going to community events or meeting at coffee shops or going to a local festival and setting up a booth. And Hannah mentioned some of these items earlier, but it's really effective at how we reach a broad group of people as opposed to just the people that are really in favor or really opposed to a project. And it's actually quite a bit more efficient to do this as well, because you can have more one-on-one time with individuals, and they can maybe spend 5 to 10 minutes with someone as opposed to coming to a 2-hour meeting. At the same time, as an engineer, I do like to get into the weeds occasionally, and I think for years we've always stayed very high level at public meetings, but the public is becoming really savvy when it comes to transportation issues. Every city has a blog or numerous blogs devoted towards transportation, and everyone's really sharp, and just there's so much information out there for everyone. So I think it's actually really important that part of your communication with the public really does involve some of the details, some of the technical issues, because we're going to the public so that we can help them understand trade-offs for projects. And you can't really understand trade-offs if they don't really have the details. So it's certainly a balancing act, because you're still going to have some of the more traditional people at public meetings. But in my mind, we can't be afraid to not talk numbers at some level.
Yeah, great points, Adam. Thanks. So as I mentioned, our guide is just an introduction to Complete Streets project level performance. And I know all of you are involved in the national scene in research, so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about project evaluation or other types of multimodal performance measurement research or efforts underway at that level. Adam, how about you go first?
Okay, thanks. So we, Kittleson, are working with the Highway Safety Research Center out of University of North Carolina, and we're working with Federal Highway with their Office of Human Environment on developing a guidebook for evaluating, establishing, and tracking pedestrian and bicycle performance measures, really with the intent of informing, facilitating this process of establishing, tracking ped bike performance measures. The intent is to act as a practical resource for practitioners at the local, regional, state, national level, providing a framework for coordinating measures established at all different scales. Should definitely want to point out that it's not establishing any kind of required performance measures, but it's certainly laying the groundwork for what a lot of people are doing across the country, and that's really a big component of this study. It's talking to so many people across the country that are doing a lot of really innovative things in terms of bicycle performance measurement at the local, regional, state level. Bringing them together, we're having a series of webinars with this broad range of people to just see what they're doing that's innovative, what's working, and really what isn't working, so that the impacts to projects can be determined based on some of these measures.
Great, thanks. Megan, I know you have some ongoing projects.
Yeah, it's particularly exciting for me to be a part of this webinar today because I'm part of launching the new ITE Complete Streets Council that just got launched in January. And so just having ITE be part of these conversations is fantastic and definitely something that I think ITE is wanting to do more of, and that's one of the reasons why the council was created this year. And there's a lot happening at ITE in this field. There's been recent efforts to update the trip generation manual and the ITE planning handbook to be much more multimodal, to be moving towards a person trip generation rather than a vehicle trip generation. And I think a lot of that is really important as we think about performance measures, that some of the reference materials and standard approaches that we use as planners and engineers are catching up with that and providing us good documents and guidelines to be following. There's also, we're number 2 of 3 in ITE journal articles that are coming out in a series on tactical urbanism. And I think that that's also something we haven't mentioned yet today, but a really great option as we think about this kind of collaborative planning effort to really get the community much more engaged and be thinking about what are those ideal outcomes that we want to see out of projects is using interim design and tactical urbanism as a way to test drive things, and really a way to think about, before you have to put huge financial commitments on the line, is this project that we're thinking about putting in going to meet the goals that we have in mind for this? And so that's the 3-part series journal article is focusing on ways in particular that the engineers and planners who perhaps have been following the NACTO guidelines and thinking about incorporating more of those into their jurisdictions can think about an engineering response to that that's not just, no, we can't do that, but more, if we want to do that, here are some of the safety and operational considerations that need to be in place. So we're hoping that that'll be really useful from a practical implementation considerations. And the third document that I wanted to mention that the ITE has been involved in and which is imminently to be released is accommodating pedestrians and bicyclists at interchanges. And I think when we think about complete streets, certainly interchanges are probably one of the most difficult places to make truly complete, and one of the places where trade-offs are definitely going to need to be made. And so but it's also, in my experience, the place that as we move from pedestrian and bicycle planning 1.0 to 2.0 and beyond, those areas of cities that got ignored in the first generation plans are now the ones that really need to be fixed because they are now the big barriers. They're the reasons why a grander vision for a city hasn't yet been realized, is because you still have this big block right in the middle. So I think that hopefully this new set of guidelines coming out will be helpful and hopefully help with some of those trade-off decisions to be able to say, well, now we have a national guidance that shows us some ways to do this that are not just from an auto perspective.
That's Great, Megan. Thanks so much. And Marshall, I hinted at the beginning that you're working on some research too. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Right. Well, I'm involved in a couple of National Cooperative Highway Research Projects, NCHRP for short, which is a program administered by the Transportation Research Board, but funded through really the state DOTs and partnership with some other agencies about trying to provide practical guidance and information for sort of vexing challenges that exist today. And two of them really come to mind for this topic, and one of them is NCHRP 1548. It's titled Guidelines for Designing Low and Intermediate Speed Roadways That Serve All Users. And it really is about sort of complete streets, but how do you, from a roadway designs perspective, in low and intermediate speeds, which is 45 miles an hour and less, choose design elements and controls and criteria and then balance those through a trade-off process to come up with the best overall design considering all users. And that is and that's really a great step in the right direction, because the Policy on Geometric Design, the Green Book produced by AASHTO, is pretty much based on vehicular information and vehicular service. And so this is going to hopefully educate the traditional designer on how to integrate the other users into that process in a much more effective way. And the other one is, and by the way, that process is going to be finished, hopefully those guidelines either late this year or early next year. And then there's NCHRP 1552, which is titled Developing a Context-Sensitive Functional Classification System for More Flexibility in Geometric Design. That's underway, should be completed, I think, mid-next year. And it's all about that we need a functional classification system that is more than just based on vehicular travel needs and system and hierarchy of expressways and principal arterials and collectors and locals. It's somehow blending contextual issues, user issues, and vehicle system needs into a more holistic functional classification approach. So both of those, I think, will be very beneficial to moving forward with advancing complete streets and addressing all users.
Great. So there's so much exciting stuff that's coming very soon. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing that. I'm going to take a few questions from the audience while we still have some time left. I know a few people asked if we could take just a quick step back and explain what level of traffic stress means. So I think Adam and Megan, you both mentioned it. Either one of you could take that question.
Sure. I guess I can provide a little bit of overview, and I'm sure Megan can chime in as well. So it's a relatively new measure developed from San Jose State University, I believe, but it breaks it down to the 4 different types of bicyclist, which I think people may have seen a lot lately. Really, the Roger Geller types of cyclist, and then essentially assesses some level of quality of service on a network of streets based on those different types of bicycling users. So if you're a really confident cyclist, then it identifies the streets that you feel comfortable biking. Or if you're a cyclist that's maybe not very comfortable but you're open to biking, it identifies streets that are comfortable for you. I think really a valuable piece of that, it identifies pinch points where there are things in place that when we see every day, we immediately recognize if you're a cyclist, this is really terrible. For instance, like a right turn slip lane, or a really large roadway that you may have to cross. And that's important because when we talk about bike networks, let's, for instance, talk about a long street that may have bike lanes, for instance, a lot of people may see that as comfortable. But if you have to cross a 6-lane divided highway, then suddenly your trip is not as comfortable. But the tool really lays it out clearly in a mapping format is really the most common way to see it. That identifies where these different types of cyclists can bike and helps you to prioritize where your investments should go to accommodate some of these types of cyclists.
We found that it's really helpful for both network planning and for corridor planning, so you can kind of use GIS to do an LTS analysis for your whole network and be able to find kind of maybe where some of the gaps that you want to fill in are. And then it's also been helpful for us for corridor planning to do alternatives analysis and be able to compare how the level of traffic stress across 3 different alternatives would weigh in particular for communities that have set an 8 to 80 goal for some of their bicycle networks. It helps us be able to make sure that there's not, like Adam was mentioning, some gap in that essentially kind of renders that entire corridor, that entire route to not be 8 to 80 accessible because they would have to cross that one piece, or there's that one stretch that turns into sharrows where it's otherwise a cycle track or something like that.
Thanks for that explanation. Another sort of common question that's come up in the box has been about using new performance measures does take some resources. How do agencies, both large and small, make the time and space for doing things in a different way, like we're suggesting today? Tough question.
Well, this is Marshall. I think that that is an issue because there are small projects, there are large projects, and again, large and small communities, and resources do vary quite a bit, and the level of resources you can actually get approved to do the analysis can be quite a challenge. And so sometimes I think you have to do a higher level, more conceptual evaluation and the use of, I think, as Megan said, infographics really stress what things look like, how they work, but you may not be able to get into a data or analytical intensive process there. So I think it's sort of like levels. It's like planning levels of performance measurement, maybe as opposed to more detailed level of analysis. And I think that's the way some communities may have to operate. But I think it's still critical to actually address what the performance outcomes should be and evaluate those, list those, and discuss those and evaluate them at some level, even if you don't have the resources to provide what may be a full depth analysis.
We've been using crowdsourced data as a pretty effective way. There are definitely some pros and cons on it. There is a recent white paper that the Ped Bike Information Center just published on crowdsourcing for pedestrian and bicycle data. And I found that it's been helpful both in terms of kind of filling out a network inventory on what you have and what you don't have, as well as helping to prioritize locations that you might want to collect more data or might focus some more detailed analysis on by just flagging kind of key hotspots from the community. So that might be one way if you don't have a good kind of GIS-rich database to start with, to try to prioritize or to try to get some of that by asking for a lot of people to help with that.
Thanks. And I guess as the moderator of this discussion, I'm going to also insert the idea that you have partners that you can work with. The transportation agency doesn't have to do everything alone. Lots of community groups are interested in this. Public health is very interested in data collection and measurement. You can partner with your public safety and emergency responders. There are other ways to collect data and analyze it that don't have to be the Transportation Department acting alone. And I also want to point out that one of our key things that we talk about is that you can use easy and simple measures. So if you don't have a lot of money and you can't employ these more complicated tools or things that show a more comprehensive picture, you can still go out there and say, this is what we did. We built this many blocks of sidewalks. We changed this intersection from this to that. And these are legitimate measures of success to show that you achieved a goal that your community wanted. I think maybe we have time for one more question. Let's see. I guess a good one is something that we don't talk about too much, but we should, is about maintenance and operations. Are there performance evaluation or measures that relate to that? Anyone want to take that quickly?
Well, this is Marshall Elijah. As an ex-Public Works Director, and I do have a strong sensitivity for those areas too. And yes, I mean, I think that there are performance outcomes and measurements, but there's also a life cycle evaluation that needs to be considered at some point. And not to say that just because something has a higher life cycle cost, it's not the best alternative, but it is a consideration. So I guess what I'm basically saying is I agree that operation and maintenance should be a consideration of these different design alternatives and techniques and applications.
Thanks, Marshall. Okay, so with 1 minute left, I'm going to thank our panelists here. I really enjoyed your discussion, and I hope everyone who joined us today learned as much as I have. So thanks again to Marshall, Megan, and Adam for your time and knowledge. The guide will be officially released on Thursday. If you registered for this webinar before today, you received an email with a link to download an advanced copy. So check that out today if you have it. If not, hang on until Thursday, and we'll also post a recap and a recording of today's event on Thursday. And many thanks again to AARP for supporting this event and to everyone who joined us today.